Hi class, in this assignment I'm going to be going over your first lesson plan assignment, promoting mathematical thinking. So for this assignment you're going to develop a math lesson plan that helps students develop critical thinking and problem solving skills. So you'll be doing this by starting with a lesson plan for K5 grade level. You're going to choose your state math standards and choose one standard. You also use the class profile that is located in your week's study materials over here to support you with writing your lesson plans. So for this assignment, you're going to be filling out the entire lesson plan document. But in the multiple means of expression section, you want to include 5 questions that align to your lesson objective that the teacher can pose for the students. Those questions should be activating prior knowledge, they should be identifying student misconceptions, they should be looking at connecting concepts, procedures, or applications, and they should encourage critical thinking, exploration, and problem solving. So, in addition to writing your main lesson plan, you want to make sure you include 5 questions in that multiple means of expression section. So, when you're also looking at that multiple means of engagement section, you want to include opportunities for students to consider real world application, prior knowledge, and the steps to solve a problem. So, when I think about the traditional College of Edge lesson plan, that's not always in alignment with the constructivist strategies that we've been learning about in topic 2. So for this lesson plan, I like to give students the option of using the traditional lesson plan template or the 5E lesson plan template. The 5E lesson plan template you may have seen if you've already taken ELM 360, your science class, because that's the lesson plan that you use in that class. Because that lesson plan is formatted in more of a constructivist approach to teaching, I really like students to try using it for math, but that is not a requirement. You can use either the College of Ed lesson plan template, the traditional one, or the 5E lesson plan template. I have 2 exemplars that I'm going to post with this week's announcement for you to look at, and let's go ahead and take a look at those. So first I'm going to start with our traditional lesson plan template. And so for this exemplar model, we see that students are looking at equivalent fractions. When I go into my lesson summary, they give me a quick summary of what it's about. They've considered all of the classroom factors, how many ELLs are in the class profile, how many students have an IEP. When you're looking at your ELLs, consider students' levels. Students who are at a higher level, like a 3 or 4 or 5, those students typically have basic English down. They're just working on that academic language. And so they don't often need translations, they don't often need any support in their native language. They often need more support in academic language. So take that in consideration when you're thinking about how you're going to differentiate for students. You want to identify that state standard. It's important that you know the state standard is very, what I like to say, meaty, meaning I might not teach this whole standard in one day. So you might just pull out a part or two as appropriate to write your objectives. Your objectives should be directly aligned to this standard. Often I remind students that use some of those words that we see, some of those verbs that we see in our standard in our objective. So, for example, this one says that students can recognize and generate, they can explain why they are equivalent, might use visual fraction models. And so you can see that students are able to represent fractions using the models, or students will be able to write an equivalent fraction when given another fraction. So we can see them, that's them generating those equivalent fractions. When you get down to the academic language, don't just identify terms, but also give me how you're going to teach them, a quick synopsis of how you'll make sure that the students learn the terms within the lesson. You'll include your resources, All right, let's look at the bulk of the lesson. So, first in the anticipatory set, you're trying to gather background knowledge that students have, and you're trying to engage them in an exciting part of the day. So, tell me step by step exactly what you would do. You notice that this exemplar model even has the words that they'll say. Remember last week when we learned about fractions? See, this is the level of detail that you should be writing on your lesson plans. A lesson plan should be able to be picked up by any other teacher and they should be able to implement it. So you want to be very specific in how you're teaching. When we go down to the multiple means of representation section, think about this section as the teacher action. How are you um, instructing students? So, what are you going to do to teach the students? How are you representing the math content? So the representation comes first, and that would be the instruction. And this is why I say this lesson plan template is not always in alignment with our constructivist strategies. Because in constructivism, before teaching happens, you would often have the students explore and work on some of the content first through an exploration before the teaching happens. Moving down, you'll see that there is a section for you to tell me how you're going to differentiate for each of the multiple means sections. So think about how am I going to, when I'm instructing, provide support for my English language learners? So will I use hands-on materials so they can see or visual aids? Will I be using videos or word banks so that they know what words I'm talking about when I am um, teaching? You'll want to include how you'll differentiate for special needs students, gifted, and what you'll do for those early finishers as well. Now, in the multiple means of engagement section, as the assignment directions say, we have to include opportunities for students to consider real world application, prior knowledge, and steps to solve the problem. So, when I look at this, you want to think about engagement as what the students are doing now. In the engagement section, students' actions. How are they engaging with the content? So, this is all about student actions. What are they doing after you've instructed them? Or it could be during your instruction. So, you might do something together where I show them and then I have them do it themselves. So, how they're engaging with the content and the vocabulary. In addition, please include step by step and create a detailed picture of what that looks like. We have the differentiation section for them as well. So you'll see that, how are we going to differentiate the materials for our ELLs, our special needs, our gifted students, and our earlier finishers. In the multiple means of expression session, this is where you're going to put those questions that student you'll be required the 5 questions as the assignment says. Those are questions that are related to prior knowledge, potential student misconceptions, connecting concepts, and encouraging critical thinking. In our multiple means of expression section, this is how we are assessing learning. So you'll want to include formative and summative assessment ideas, and you'll tell me step by step what you'll do. You'll want to identify how English language learners, special needs, gifted, all of them will be challenged or supported in these assessments and those questions that you can use for formative assessment. Finally, you'll get to that extension activity in the homework. Just make sure that's connected to what you're doing. This is graded on the rubric, so do not say NA or none because you will lose points if you don't fill this part out. Finally, you're going to conclude your lesson plan with a rationale. You're going to identify 3 instructional strategies that you used in your lesson plan. And for that rationale, you're going to describe why these strategies were used and how they promote collaboration, communication, critical thinking, and creativity. So the 4 C's. Make sure that you use all 4 of those words when you're talking about your strategies and how some of them promote those 4 areas. Please bold the names of the strategies so they pop out and I can see them easily. Now let's take a quick look at the 5E lesson plan template. The 5E lesson plan template is just structured a little bit differently. So we have some of the same things like the lesson summary, the student factors, standards and objectives, and then we have a focus question. So this focus question would be kind of like that big question that we'll be answering by the end of our lesson. Um, and then here's some possible answers you'll be looking for by the end of the lesson. This focus question can also count as those 5 questions that we're including in the multiple means of expression section. One thing I also like is some anticipation of misconceptions or challenges that we have here. You can use this also when you're thinking about those 5 questions if you're choosing to use the 5E lesson plan template. There is a section for differentiation here. This is kind of like an in general differentiation, but you want to include some ideas in each of the 5E lesson plans. You'll also see some probing questions. These questions can also support with, I will count those towards the 5 questions that you have are required to write in your lesson plan. Again, we have materials. One thing you'll notice about the template that I attached with the announcement this week is I tried to align the College of Ed lesson plan to the 5E lesson plan. So you'll see this is the engage section, which I might know as anticipatory set on the traditional lesson plan. The reason I did this is because the rubric has these parts on the rubric, and I want you to know which part we're referring to when I'm grading on the rubric. So you want to give me detailed and ideas on how you're activating prior knowledge, linking previous learning, or presenting the focus question. And so step by step, I should be able to picture this in my head. Then when we get to the explore phase, you'll notice the multiple means of engagement comes first on the 5E lesson plans. This means how am I engaging students before I teach? This is in alignment with a constructivist strategy. So I often, will give students a problem. For example, I might say in this one, I'll pose the question. If Monica and Gilbert have a whole cake and Monica eats half the cake and Gilbert eats 2/4 of the cake, who ate more cake? So before I teach students about equivalent fractions, they're going to work through this problem and discover themselves that actually Monica and Gilbert ate the same amount of cake. They'll explore this using fraction tiles, drawing pictures, and this is how you would roll out the 5E lesson plan. You'll notice here there are some um, ideas for differentiation here. So we have students with IEPs or English language learners, and they give me some ideas for differentiation in this section as well. That's important because on the rubric it does say in each of these multiple means sections that you included ideas for differentiation. When we get to the multiple means of representation section, that's in the explain phase. Explain in the 5E lesson plan is where teaching happens. So you want to start by debriefing on what they learned in the explore activity and talking about that and using that experience to now teach them about your new concept. In this example, equivalent fractions. You'll also introduce your vocabulary words in this section, and then please also think through some of that differentiation. How are we going to support our ELLs, our IEPs, and challenge our gifted students? I can imagine maybe my gifted students would answer this explore question pretty quickly. So I might even in the explore area give them a harder question than the other students are working on. Finally, we come to our elaborate, which would I have as our extension for the day. So this is kind of when you're looking at the lesson plan template, how are we going to extend their ideas and have them practice or do more work around this idea? So this also, I would say, kind of goes in with our multiple means of engagement as well. The elaborate section is how they're now applying their new learning. Finally, in the evaluate section, that's the multiple means of expression. Please include those 5 questions here. This lesson plan didn't require 5 questions. Um, it wasn't the same exact assignment. So you won't see the 5 questions here, but I can also use the questions above. And finally, we have our rationale with our 3 instructional strategies, and have those bolded for me. So let's take a quick look at the rubric so you know how you will be graded. So, first, are you considering all the students and the factors in the grouping of your students? So, you've considered their effects on planning, you are assessing students in a meaningful way throughout the lesson. So, that's important. With our ELLs, remember they have language barriers. So, how can you support them with language? For example, I can give them sentence frames to help them talk. I can give them word banks or picture word banks or things like that to help them understand the words we're using. Next, standards and learning objectives. Standards and learning targets or objectives. We just want to make sure that your standards and learning targets are aligned and they are measurable and they're developmentally appropriate for the age that your lesson is planned for. Then we have academic language. As I said before, don't just include the words, but also tell me a strategy for teaching them. Resources, materials, equipment, and technology. Just that you are choosing resources that are innovative, they enhance the lesson. Remember, many students benefit from hands on um, methods and hands on, especially when we're thinking about differentiating for students. So, try to include some hands on materials when you're thinking about the materials that you might use for your lesson. Anticipatory set. Are you effectively engaging students and activating prior knowledge? Then we have our multiple means of representation. If you use the 5E lesson plan template, that'll be our explain phase. Multiple means of engagement. If you use the 5E lesson plan template, that will be our explore phase. And then the multiple means of expression, that would be our evaluate phase. As you can see in all of them, they allow you to explore, practice the content in meaningful ways, and then you address the needs of all learners. Here under this one, you are representing creatively, um, and you are presenting content in a way that's developmentally appropriate, and you're addressing the needs of all learners. You'll see throughout these, they'll say that you're addressing the needs of all learners. You'll note that on the multiple means of expression section, that it's well aligned to your objectives. You're giving opportunities a chance to show their learning, and you are providing ways that you'll monitor and adjust instruction. So if students don't get it, how are you going to give them that feedback? Then we have an area for our extension activities, and then your reflection, where you're talking about communication, collaboration, critical thinking, and creativity. And then finally, our mechanics. So this is how you'll be graded on this assignment. If you have any questions about how to do your lesson plan this week, don't hesitate to reach out and look at those exemplar models to support you.